So good morning, everyone. Thank you for your participation and your interest. My name is Michael Steinberger. I am founder and CEO of Jewish Heritage Alliance, a platform dedicated to promoting the story of Sefarad, the Jews of the Iberian Peninsula, nowadays Spain and Portugal. This is the third of a series of live interviews we are bringing you this week, featuring a stellar lineup of people with intimate knowledge and connection to the saga of Sefarad. I would like to thank and acknowledge Hope Network for partnering with us on these interview series. Our special guest this morning is Genie Milgrom. Born a Roman Catholic in Havana, Cuba, Genie will share with us her fascinating journey back to her Jewish roots, tracing her crypto-Jewish heritage 22 generations back to 1405. So good morning, Genie. Welcome.
Good
We want to hear
morning,
your
Michael.
story.
It's great to be here. Here you are in some beautiful palm-laden thing, and I am in a village in Spain, virtually.
Okay, so I read your book, My 15 Grandmothers. I found it fascinating. To the best of your abilities, considering that many of the people with us today have not met you, take us through your journey.
Absolutely, I will. I was born in Havana, Cuba, and my family moved to Miami when I was 4. So this was a Roman Catholic family from Spanish ancestors. So my grandparents had moved to Cuba in 1920. So this wasn't one of those old established Cuban families. This is a family that was one generation in Cuba. And my maternal grandparents were first cousins, and we all moved together to Miami. Being good Catholics, I was put in the best elementary schools known to man, Catholic schools. There were not that many Cubans here at the time when we came, right at the very beginning, but from a very young age, and I'll say the age of 6, I started feeling that I was not really a part of the people that I was surrounded by. I cannot pinpoint the feeling, except to tell you that everyone that comes to me nowadays saying that they feel that they have these Jewish roots had the exact same feeling. And if you haven't had it, it's very difficult to explain, but it's kind of a feeling of not belonging. And in those intense Catholic school days where there's enough jokes made about Catholic schools in the 60s and the nuns and everything else, but I was feeling a sort of dissonance with the ideology. But I've always been a very, let's say, spiritual, religious. Nowadays it's more PC to say it's spiritual, but I was always religious. So I continued on, and still having my doubts about all the ideology, I continued on to a Catholic high school here in Miami as well, where I was a spiritual leader for the encounters. That's when the church became like more modern-ish in 1972 after the Vatican Council. So now it was all, services on the beach and people swaying their hands back and forth. It was a beautiful spiritual sort of way to be. But I was still with that, oh my gosh, something's wrong. And my soul just kept tearing at me. But I went with it because what do you do when you're young, and what do you do? Then I went on to a Catholic university. I went on to Berry College. And at the time it was all women. And there I had the opportunity to kind of spread my wings a little bit. I was very young. I was 15 years old. And I was taking comparative religions. And when I was doing that, we were studying everything from Buddhism to Shinto to you name it, it was happening. And my gosh, when we hit on Judaism, I had one of those epiphanies or aha moments. It was the moment that I said, this is it. This is back to basics. This is where I belong. And I started to really read everything I could and grab onto Judaism, but I didn't follow with any action. It was just the way that I embraced it. Then all of a sudden, I got married extremely young, and I had 2 children. So now I was a young married woman working in my dad's company and not really able to do anything and start to, let's say, when you're young and a mom, you're not into looking into your past. So I did nothing about it until I reached about the age of 28, 29. And that's when I just couldn't do that anymore. My kids were baptized, they had communion, they were being taken to Catholic schools. And the minute that I saw my son going into like his first Sunday school at the church, it kind of gave me a deja vu of what am I doing? I'm doing to my child, I'm going to do to my child what I was so uncomfortable doing. He was not in a Catholic school, but it was Sunday school. So I immediately started going back to study everything about Judaism, books and books and books and books, and they were hiding under my bed. I felt like I was hiding pornography, for crying out loud. It was like, how to be a Jew, what is a Jew, how do you become a Jew, the Jewish holidays, you know, my sister is a Jew, and you name the book, it was under my bed. Obviously, this intensity with which I took this on didn't fare well, and I became a single mom. As a single mom, I started going to a Reconstructionist temple. I didn't know, and you know, I had read a lot, but I didn't know any better. Then I stayed there for about a year. I moved on to a Reform temple. Then I moved on to a conservative synagogue. I didn't stay there long. And I started causing such a ruckus in the family. It was so difficult for my family and my mom especially to accept that I was doing this, and there was no stopping me. It was, so I needed more. Having come from a Catholic school background before the days of the swaying on the beach, I was very regimented in what I needed in, let's say, my own religion. And I found a small synagogue in my neighborhood, Orthodox. And I said, oh my gosh, I'm home. For many reasons, all that swaying and singing that was going on, let's say at the Reconstructionist, it wasn't enough from what I had read. So I decided that to really come home, let's say, or come back to Judaism or convert to Judaism, I needed to do it the Orthodox way. Little did I understand that it would be a 5.5-year process of conversion, a very painful process, I must tell you. And, you know, I really get pretty exhausted when I talk about my personal story because I give it from my heart. My family wasn't really talking to me. My friends from before weren't talking to me. The friends that I had made in the Reconstructionists, when I went Reform, they weren't talking to me. When I went from Reform to Conservative, they weren't talking to me. Now, when I went to Orthodox, no one was talking to me. So it was very lonely. I was with my children. My son was 15, my daughter was 3. And I was forging ahead to do this and trying as best as possible to make my life, you know, I was still working with Dad and he was okay with me, but in the privacy of our offices, everyone else had kind of skedaddled. And it was a very long 5 years. Finally, I converted, and it was really the happiest moment of my life. My soul had aligned with my, let's say, my person. It took me a very long time to have people in the synagogue come to me, talk to me. No one was really extending a hand. It's something that we'll talk about later, how difficult it is for someone like me. And I'm not in some faraway country in Honduras or in Costa Rica. I am in Miami, Florida. After a while, because it's who I am, I became very active, sisterhood president, treasurer of the synagogue. But a person without this kind of intensity or drive that I have would probably just have sat in the back shyly with no one really reaching out. So I started my Jewish life as a convert, and very happily so. A couple of years later, I met my husband, Michael, who comes from a long dynasty of Hasidic family and came from the ghetto in Antwerp. And his family all lived in Israel, everyone Hasidic. And this is from the Rizhiner Rebbe. So he comes from a long line of Rebbes and family. And I didn't know that when I met him, and I certainly didn't know what the implications of that would be for me. We fell in love. He was Jewish, I was Jewish. Let's go. And I did get the first implications of that when they all flew into Miami for the wedding. And I'm like, because they were really, 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 really not modern Orthodox. So it was a family that I've now been in with 30 years and very loved. They took me to Rebbe's, and I've met everyone in the family. And obviously, I'm very close to the family. So life went along this way. Michael integrated into my life. My son had since moved out of the house. My daughter was 8 or 9. And I began this in my home, having an Orthodox home very near to the synagogue where I am now, a Young Israel. And I'm still at the same synagogue I was then. It's been a very long journey with this synagogue, and I've been very happy with everyone there. We made a lot of friends. We integrated. However, always a convert. And then one day my maternal grandmother dies on a Friday morning. I'm Sabbath observant, I'm Orthodox. And my mom tells me we have to bury her within hours. I'm like, por Dios, Mom, you are Cuban, you are Catholic, bury her on Monday. I observe the Sabbath. Please don't put me through this. No, in our family, we have to bury before 24 hours. And I was stunned at this. My rabbi gave me a million ways that I could get around this, but all of them included spending the night in the funeral home, something that I didn't really want to do. So I stayed home, and of course, my mom, it was even harder for her. I look back and I look at how hard it was for me, the relationship with Mom. By the way, Mom is still alive. She's 92 with Alzheimer's. But I look back at my relationship with Mom and how much pain I had, that I had been, let's use the word, shunned. On the other hand, I never until recently started looking at how did she feel about what in other words, what was her take on it, and how much pain I must have caused her from having stepped away from, let's say, the path that my family had set me on. So I didn't go to the funeral. And the day after the funeral, my mom showed up at my house. I had gone to shul. All my friends were in the house with me. And Mom showed up with a little box and said, your grandmother wanted this to give to you on the day of her death. And my grandmother knew I had converted. I mean, she knew the whole thing. I was very close to her. She kept telling me that it was so dangerous. She just said, so dangerous what you're doing. And I thought she meant it was dangerous for my soul, because that's a Catholic thing, right? And later I realized, much later, that I think my grandma was trying to tell me that it was so dangerous to be a Jew. So on that morning, when I opened the box and I see she left me Star of David earrings and a hamsa, very antique, and it was in a plain white box, no fanfare, no tissue paper, no nothing, just rolling around in a little white box. And I said, oh my gosh. My grandmother and grandfather were first cousins. My grandmother had taught me a lot of customs as I was growing up, always in the kitchen. We were 5 grandchildren. 4 granddaughters and 1 grandson, and she did not teach these customs to anybody else, just to me. She taught me to check for blood in the eggs, never to put them directly into a recipe. She taught me to take a little bit of dough and throw it in the back of the oven when you made more than 5 pounds or 2.5 kilos of flour without a blessing. This is something that Jewish women do whenever they make a recipe with more than 5 pounds of flour. You take a little bit of dough, like a tithe, and then you say a blessing. And it's one of the most important blessings that we as Jewish women say, but there was no blessing to my grandmother's custom. And it was just take the dough, aluminum foil, burn in the back of the oven, and that's it. So she taught me how to check for insects in the vegetables. And I don't mean just, a perfunctory check of asparagus. No, it was wash them and dry them and look again and put vinegar in the water. In other words, what Jewish women do today, because we are not allowed to eat any kind of an insect. So this went on and on with a lot of, let's say, what are Jewish kitchen customs. And I was taught these, and it never occurred to me that they could have been Jewish at some point. I don't know why it didn't occur to me. I was so focused and really laser focused on getting through this conversion that I didn't think about it. But the minute I opened that box, I realized that it was just something incredible, because I think she was trying to tell me that they were always Jews. And why she didn't verbalize this to me, I have no idea. So I decided at that very moment that because I had not converted my children, and because being Jewish was such an incredible, amazing pride and joy for me, I decided that, you know what, I'm going to research my heritage. And my grandfather had left a tree going back to probably 1790. And since they were first cousins, I could see that their parents were first or second cousins, their parents were cousins, their parents were cousins, and no one ever married outside of the family until it got to my mom. So it was like, wow, this is something. I started reading a little bit on what was written at the time, which was not that much, about the pre-Inquisition Jews. And I said, you know what? Let me investigate their lineage. I got an investigator in Spain. He and I went slowly. I wanted only a maternal lineage. And in traditional Judaism, it's a maternal lineage only, because you always know where the child came from. A lot of people ask me about it, but basically that's the bottom line. If a woman's pregnant, you know she had the baby. So it's only a maternal lineage. And I didn't know what I had to do because nobody had done it before. And if they had done it, it wasn't something. Their social media was just in its baby steps, and it was not talked about. But I had sat in front of a Beit Din for so long. I knew that if I had to face a Beit Din anywhere in the world, and of course I figured if I was going to be able to return my family and state that I was born Jewish, I was going to have to face a similar Beit Din. So although I didn't know there was no precedent, what I did know is that I was going to have to find proof positive that every grandmother was linked to the grandmother before. So with this genealogist, luckily, we went back via the Catholic Church. Everybody was Catholic via the Catholic Church. And luckily, the Catholic Church records, when you find one, list the grandmothers and their grandmothers. So it really, every time I found one document, I was able to go back. And I also found, and now in retrospect, it's a blessing that no one died. Can you imagine if somebody had died, that would have been the end of that. So basically, I started going all the way back, and I started finding circumstantial evidence in the files. The genealogist would find them. I would scrutinize them for circumstantial evidence. Evidence such as, for a period of about 200 years, none of the babies in the family were baptized. There is a phrase in the birth and baptism record that says they were not taken to the church out of necesidad. That's how it is in Spanish. And that means that the baby was too ill to be baptized. Now, nobody died. So as ill as all of these babies were at birth, nobody died. So obviously they had found a way around this. Also, my mom, who was aware of my search, not happily, but aware, she kept saying, oh, you're going to find that we were a super Catholic family. You're going to find that we had so many nuns and priests. Well, that started really making me very, very happy, because what I've since learned is that every crypto-Jewish family would make sure that at every generation, it was chock full of nuns and priests. The priests, to make sure that the Jewish rituals were being kept at the same time that the Catholic ritual was going on. So for example, if you were going to be married in a church on a Monday or a Sunday or a Saturday, on Friday, in your home, your family priest, your relative, could be your brother, your uncle, would come to the house. They would sneak you off to a mikvah, a Jewish ritual bath that Sephardic women do before getting married, and then they would marry them Jewishly, and the following day they'd go to the church and have the whole Jewish wedding. So there was all of this ritual stuff that was happening underground, and I was able to find not just priests. So mom was right. A lot of priests. And why the nuns were important as well is that a lot of the children were taken off to these convents and hidden. So nuns and priests were, by the way, I even found a saint. So the saint portion, I don't know how it benefits the Jewish or the not, but I even found a saint. So mom was right. That was definitely there. So I had all this circumstantial evidence. When I got to the 15th grandmother, I started documenting my journey. I wrote my first book, the one that you read, My 15 Grandmothers, and it was documenting the whole way that I had gone back, the way that, my spiritual journey heading back, as well as being at 1545 in this village that you can see, the village of my ancestors in Fermosella, Spain, where my family lived for 500 plus years, even though it's right on the border between Spain and Portugal. So they were going back and forth and back and forth, and they were always coming back to this village. It was my granddad was born there, and my grandmother's parents were born there. My mom lived there for a few years at the age of 9. So this was definitely the village. So I put all these documents together in 1545. My genealogist went to try to find a Jewish woman at the end of the line. And there was a woman who, her mother-in-law, sister-in-law, I'm not exactly sure what it was, but it was a tenuous relationship, had been burned in the Inquisition for being a Jew. I thought that with the circumstantial evidence, the unbroken maternal lineage, everything that I had found to date, I thought, okay, that's enough. And I carried all my papers and I went back to the Beit Din in Israel. Not back, I went to the Beit Din in Israel and I sat with them, boxes of papers, and the rabbi looked at all my things and he was careful and he spoke Spanish and he was looking. And I had documented that the names at every generation of every, not there I did do the husbands, the wives, the children, aunts and uncles. I documented that every single name had been used by a Jew at some time in history. I had 8,087 names. I went with so much paperwork that you cannot imagine what was in, those office boxes okay, I went with boxes. So I'm sitting there with this rabbi in this little office and he's looking and he's looking and he's pulling up books and he's looking on the internet and he said, the last names on your tree, we're talking 1545, the last names on your tree, Santos and Govea, these are definitely very strong names that were Jewish, and you've done an incredible job and Mazal Tov. However, I need you to prove to me that there are Jews at the end of that line, because this maybe mother-in-law, sister-in-law, aunt, it's not enough. I need to know that your last grandmother, Catalina Ramirez, P.S. was her name. I need to know that your last grandmother had a Jewish mother. She, not maybe, because they married Jews, no maybes here. You need to prove, you need to prove that she had a Jewish grandmother. And he said, you need to go back to that village where everybody lived, and there's nothing on the internet, nothing in history books, nothing that it had a Jewish past. And Jews don't live alone. So on top of that, I need you to go back to that village and prove to me that there was a Jewish history there. And then we'll talk about it. I had gone to another rabbi before him that had given a decree that all the Jews that were in Mallorca, which is an island, and were Chuetas, because in Spain they were crypto-Jews. It used to be Marranos. We don't use that anymore. But the Chuetas in Mallorca is what they were called. And Chueta means like a chuleta, which is a pork chop. So this rabbi had gone to Mallorca and had said that all of the crypto-Jews that came from Mallorca were Jews without having to convert, without anything, because they were isolated in an island. So before I went to the head of the Beit Din, I took all my stuff. He didn't speak English, it was only Yiddish. So at the time I went with my husband, we took all the papers and he's looking and, he didn't even really, just the final thing of the paper, but he said, look, My husband argued Talmud over there with him, right? I mean, it was this whole discussion about bringing back the family because that's what I wanted to do, bring back the family. He kept saying that halachically, by Jewish law, I was a Jew. What more did I want? I was salt. He couldn't make salt into salt. So it was really very discouraging at that first onset with the visit with this rabbi because it had taken forever to make the appointment. He had so many people waiting in line to see him. We met with him and his son. He had done it for the Jews of Mallorca. Maybe it was 2013, something like that. I'm not sure of the date. He had done it for the Jews of Mallorca because it was a closed population. But there was no way that he was even going to take a look at this. And that's when I moved on to this other Beit Din. I wasn't giving up because, first of all, this search began initially for my children. By now, my children were so grown up and honestly, they didn't care. So then it became about just kind of proving to myself that I wasn't crazy. I'm not saying I'm not. I'm just saying that it wasn't about that. Just to prove to myself that all those feelings, all that had been happening as I was growing up, that wasn't something that I wanted to prove that those feelings were real. And number three, and very much more powerful in today's society, I started blogging on social media about my journey. Now, because of that, people were flocking to me. Please, I want to know if you can do it. I want to do it also. Can you help me? Can you help me? Can you help me? And the emails started growing to a couple of hundred a month. So it became very, very difficult to not move along because there were so many people waiting for this answer. So basically it continued and I left Israel very dejected. I didn't blog on social media for a little while. And my husband said to me, you do realize that we're going to have to get on a plane and go to that village, right? And I'm like, I'm afraid. I mean, yes, sometimes we do have vulnerabilities. And I said, Michael, I'm scared to death. To be honest with you, he said, you cannot sit on this perch 3,000 miles away and expect to get what the rabbis want. You either let this go, you're a halachic Jew, there's no doubt that you are a Jew by choice. So you have two choices. Either we get on a plane and we go to that village, or you just live your merry life and stop. So obviously, I had to go back. And we got to Madrid. We drove 4 hours west. And as we start driving to this village that's right on the tip between Spain and Portugal, right where there would be, let's say, an escape route, I start seeing only Portugal. And somehow it was dusk. And in the dark, across the river, because it's a tiny village, you can see it. I didn't just pick one solitary street. There's no hotel. It's a bed and breakfast. It looks like this all over. So I started seeing only Portugal and the twinkling lights on the other side of the river. And I say, oh my gosh, my family must have gotten caught in Portugal because it's not logical. It was too strong. There was all of this evidence. There was all of the priests and nuns. There was all these babies that didn't get baptized. There was other evidence in the records. There's a lot of small clues. I write about that in my second book. A lot of small clues that I saw going forward. And I said, no. So I immediately got to the bed and breakfast. I opened up my computer. I found a partial listing of Inquisition archives in Portugal. And within minutes, if not 20 minutes, I had already found 45 women attached to my Catalina Ramirez that were burned for being Jews, burned at the stake. And that moment was the aha moment because I didn't know how I was going to get that. I mean, my genealogist had already been at it, right? So he's the best. This Fernando is the best in Spain. And I was stunned. However, my job was to prove that there were Jews living in this village. Mind you, I have been in business and and a chemist in the pharmaceutical all my life with my dad. I have never been a historian. I almost failed history in high school, you know, and all of a sudden I have to like become this historian. Give me a break. But I had come too far. I knew that I couldn't just take that and go back to the Beit Din. It was half of my homework, but it wasn't my full homework. So, oh my gosh. Okay. In the morning, I set off and I'm talking in my, anybody that knows the different levels of Spanish knows that the Spanish from Spain is this like the king of it all. And the Cuban Spanish is like, you know, a slang twang. So here I am going through the village, holding my family tree in my hand, speaking my Cuban Spanish, asking about the Jews of the village. And it was, oh, there were never any Jews here. There were never any Jews here. It's only Visigoths and Moors, and there was never anybody here that was Jewish. I'm like, you know, like I don't need to hear this, but the historian at the church might know. So I schlep, to use my Yiddish, I schlep over to the church. I'm standing there with a woman who had the exact same last name as my grandfather, a compound last name, Ramus. And here I am asking her about the Jews. There were never any Jews there. Never a Jew here. And I'm like, I know there were. I know there were because I am certain that my family were Jews. They were living right across the river when the Inquisition caught them, and they lived here for 500 years. So put the pieces together, but it wasn't enough for me to go back to the Beit Din. So finally, she kept asking me the names in the family, and I'm going through pages and pages. It was folded up like a book, my family tree. And every Hispanic name that you can find, Menendez, Gutierrez, Ramirez, Alvarez, blah, 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 blah. And I'm turning pages and she's shaking her head no. By now, 2 hours had passed. You know, I was trembling at the door of that church because if she let me go, that was it. Where was I going to go? I mean, she was it. And then I remembered that my grandfather, in a spidery handwriting, had written at the top of the family tree, "Nos decían los bollicos." They called us bollico. I have since learned that in Ladino, bollico means little bread. And bollicos could be a name for bakers or whatever, but I blurted it out. It was like divine intervention because I had not seen that family tree in years. It had taken me many years to get to that point. And I said, they called us los bollicos. And she's like, oh, let me take you to see the synagogue tomorrow. And I'm like, really, lady? I wanted to take this massive family tree and bop her over the head because I mean, I was schwitzing it out. I was standing there. Michael was walking around somewhere and I was like, you know, oh my gosh, fine. Next morning we go to a place and just down the street and she's telling me that the arch is the original arch. It's the oral tradition. We go inside. The lady had lived there in her 80s. She had lived there for many years. She redid the whole thing, but oral tradition had it that the rabbi lived on the 3rd floor. Beautiful view. Absolutely beautiful view of the whole river going to Portugal. And there was nothing. There was nothing I could get my hands on. I couldn't go back to the Beit Din. I knew it. You know, this arch, they say, used to be the synagogue. Who is they and why? And I mean, I knew it. I knew enough to know that that wasn't enough. And I was really desperate. And I'm 3,000 miles away from home and I'm coming out. And I see a door leading to like a garage. And I said, can I go in the garage? No, we've never redone it. It's like almost medieval. I said, oh my gosh, have me at it. No. And even as I was doing it, I was feeling like the ugly American. Even as I was doing it, I'm bursting in this woman's house. I open the door to old garage and there's a baby gate around a hole in the floor. And even as she's telling me no, in her home, I'm removing the baby gate. And I said, what do you have down here? Oh, it's where I keep my hams and my wine. I said, perfect. And I please see it. I guess, sure. So she turns on a light and there's 7 steps. And now I'm standing in a rectangular room with a huge spout at the end. And the spout is, this is a village that's built on a granite mountain. And this spout, I went to touch it, was soft as butter, like water had flowed. And I realized I'm standing in the mikvah of this edifice. And I started taking pictures. These pictures, by the way, a lot of the pictures of what I'm talking about are on my website, geniemilgrom.com. You can just go in there and see the pictures. So I come out of there and I thank her profusely and I leave. And again, I'm not a maven. I'm not a specialist on mikvahs, ritual baths, Jewish ritual baths. But then I found a younger woman who asked me, she was a guide, and she said, tell me what you're looking for. So I'm running around and I'm showing her my iPhone. This is the Hebrew alphabet. This is a candelabra. This is a menorah, and just a whole, it's a Star of David. These are a whole bunch of like Jewish symbols. And she's taking me around and I'm taking pictures, and she shows me another ritual bath. It's like in the middle of the street with 7 steps going down, crystalline water. That's also on my website. And I'm taking pictures and pictures and pictures and pictures, and nothing is making much sense to me. Again, I'm not a historian. And I come home to Miami. I take all of these files of pictures. I'm sending them all over the world to Notre Dame, Barilan, Oxford, Biblical Archaeology Review, you name it. They went to about 100 places. And I only had one fellow answer from the north of the Galilee. And he was an archaeologist and a tour guide. And he said, you need to see those etchings with the sun of 2 o'clock. I'm like, whoa, I'm in Miami. I promised my husband we wouldn't go back. By the way, we've been back about 46 times since. But I promised my husband we wouldn't go back. And now he's telling me I have to go back with the sun of 2 o'clock. Are you for real? So I waited and nobody else answered. I got regrets. I don't really know, I don't really know what to say, but I don't know. And I said, Michael, we have to go back and see this with the sun of 2 o'clock. So like, are you nuts? Again, my whole life, people questioning me if I'm nuts, right? So this time I stop in Madrid. I get 2 of the most famous historians that have been discovering this type of thing all over Spain and Portugal. I get a video crew, and we all go 4 hours down to this village again. And I'm barely walking into the village when a very elderly man comes and says, what are you looking for? I said, oh, thank you so much. I think, I've already pretty much found what I'm looking, but I was looking for the Jews of the village and their history. He said, what's your family name? Wow. I said, Boyico. And he said, you're a descendant of Uncle Boyico? And I said, yeah, I guess so. And he said, let me show you the synagogue. He was very, very elderly. At the time, he was mayor 50 years prior. Very elderly and walking with a cane. And I said, oh, I've already seen it. Thank you so much. He said, no, you haven't. You haven't seen this one. He takes 2 steps. He knocks on a door and he said, open the synagogue. There's a descendant of Uncle Boyico here. Wow. So I go to the door. Mind you, there's this whole entourage, the videos, the historians, my husband, me, a couple of friends that had come with us. And they open and it looks like a dollhouse. The guy opens this door on the side. The kitchen is on the top and there's stairs leading down. And we start walking, and so it looks like a dollhouse when you look at it. It's broken up, and you could see that there was like a square or a rectangular open in the kitchen that they had a little rug over it, which means that, and these houses, as you can see, have not changed in centuries. So we go down there, and I could see like a shelf that was like an Aron Kodesh. There was benches all around, and there was a small exit on the side, like a separate entrance, which would have been like a women's entrance. And I'm standing there and they're all taking pictures and all I'm doing is crying. There's cockroaches running all over my feet and everybody, and I'm not saying a word. I am literally stunned at thinking that my relatives had been made to go from that gorgeous edifice that I saw with the 3 floors, the mikvah, to that hole in the ground to pray, for crying out loud. It's not that they were going down there for parties. They had to go to pray. And it was on that moment that I had my resolve that I was going to absolutely tell this story as much as I could. People tell me that I have a huge passion to tell this story. It actually, honestly, exhausts me to tell this story because there's a lot of pain attached and a lot of ups and a lot of downs, and very difficult to get through it many times. I actually told it yesterday, and I usually try not to do this too often, but now with the Zooms, it's happening. I used to go and fly somewhere to tell the story. Now I'm constantly Zooming. So I leave. I find that a lot of the pictures that I couldn't see before, with the sun of 2 o'clock on the side of one of the churches, I find that it actually says the name of God, Yud Hey Vav Hey, in the shape of like a menorah on top of a cross, like on top of the 13 tribes of Israel, symbolically in little balls in the concrete. I found like the heraldry of the village had the name Fermoseye, which is the village, written in English letters. And when you turn it around, the letters are in Hebrew, and it says Lisgor, which means closed in Hebrew. So I packed up all this stuff and I made my way back to Israel. I mean, seriously, by tenacity alone, they should have let me know that I was a Jew. Tenacity alone. Who does this? Who does this? Me. So I'm doing this on Facebook, and people now, my emails are coming in triple fold. They're coming in not just, the logical places, Latin America. They're coming, I'm blogging in English, I'm blogging in Spanish. I mean, it's crazy. And they're coming in from Hawaii. There used to be a huge Sephardic community there. People that had been in the Inquisition in Macau, in the Philippines, they're contacting me. Philippines, Pakistan, Australia. I mean, as far as this diaspora went, please help me, please help me, please help me. So I'm not there yet. I pack up everything. I go back to Israel. It takes them 2 years to translate everything into Hebrew. I finally get a letter back stating from the Beit Din Gadol, the large rabbinical court in Israel, stating that God had brought me to this place in a very roundabout way, and that no one could ever question that I was born Jewish, that all my ascendants and all my descendants would be Jewish, are Jewish, and that there is no question that I am a born Jew. So that's it up to here. If you have any questions, and then I'll continue.
We're sort of close on time. I think one of the important questions that probably resonates from your discussion is and I know it's a tall order, but your recommendation for those who find themselves in your predicament and have less tenacity than you do, or availability to follow this trail. What is your recommendation for those who want to come back, have an inkling that they are descendants? What do we do these days? Is there a shortcut here? Are we developing information that can help them?
Well, one of the projects that I took on, and I work with B'nai Anusim, or the descendants, day in and day out. I am the Anusim director for an organization called Kulanu, and I have classes twice a week for them, Honduras, Nicaragua, etc. And I get asked this question day in and day out. I have been, since 2015, spearheading a worldwide project to upload all of the Inquisition records that are yet undigitized. And we are working very hard on that. We've made big breakthroughs in Portugal, but we literally have to go back to the Inquisition records of Spain, which are in boxes, Portugal. Some of it is online. I always get people saying, oh, there's a lot of it online. Yes, some of it is online, but it's not indexed. You can't really see it. So I'm trying very hard, and have been for many years, battling the Catholic Church. To be honest, a couple of days ago, I got a very difficult email from one of the archbishops in Spain, and Mexico, Lima, Peru, Cartagena, Colombia, When we can get all this information digitized, then people will be able to find their genealogy, but they still have to make their way back via the Catholic Church. And on FamilySearch.org, which is the Mormon website, or the Latter-day Saints website, they have digitized a lot of these church records. So it is definitely possible to go back via the church records. And I did that with my paternal grandmother and got back to the 1600s just on those digitized records that you can get on their website, which is why I wrote my second book, How I Found My 15 Grandmothers, which is available on Kindle for like $5, $6. I mean, it's not, you know, I write these books to document the voyage and the path and what to do. They are not by any means a way for me to make money. They are there to help other people. So I suggest that they do that in a couple of weeks. A lot of the databases that I personally have digitized will be up on Jewish Gen. You can always contact me, but unfortunately, Michael, you have to work your way back until you find all these grandmothers in a row. We're just trying to make that path easier.
So I'd like to tell everyone that to contact Ginny, we will have her contact information on Facebook, both her website and her email. We've kind of run out of time for this particular interview. So thank you, Ginny, for
My pleasure.
sharing your amazing journey with us. We'll have many other informative webinars, including with Ginny. And so we invite you to follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and on our website. So with this, we conclude. Again, thank you so much, Ginny. Really, we appreciate that. An amazing story. And we'll see you all this afternoon. Thank you.
Bye-bye. My pleasure. Thank you.